All right, it's Wednesday night. It's Panther-Lair Show here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like and subscribe, like and subscribe, like and subscribe. It's the things I always ask you to do, and I appreciate it if you do it. Click the like button, it's down there on the left. Click the subscribe button, it's down there on your right. And we would really appreciate that. I feel like that's a good way to spend these first few minutes while we wait for people to file in to join the chat and join the conversation and discussion here on the Panther-Lair Show. It's kind of like last week. I forget, what game did we have on last week? Virginia-Louisville, I think, was last Wednesday night. Virginia really kind of playing with fire in that game. Well, the Cavs are at it again. Down at Boston College. Game's on commercial right now. 49-37 with less than 8 minutes to play. Could this finally be the moment where Virginia's playing with fire runs out and they actually get burned? They barely got past Louisville. They barely got past Notre Dame. I think when Pitt lost that game at Virginia Tech on Saturday, which we'll obviously talk plenty about here, I think there was a thought of, well, there goes the ACC regular season title. But, without getting into too much conversation about whether the league is down or not, there's certainly enough parity in this league, and the top teams are not so far above everyone else that they can't be beat. Kind of like Pitt at Virginia Tech, and certainly like what looks like it's developing right now with 7.5 minutes to go and Virginia trailing at Boston College by 12 points. Anybody can pretty much go down at any point. Miami was able to survive at Virginia Tech last night. And so maybe the Hurricanes are now going to have the inside track on the ACC regular season title and that number one seed. But somebody, I was kind of tweeting about this Virginia-Boston College game before we started the live show here, and somebody said, well, now you're going to have to spend all this time figuring out three-way tiebreakers. No, I'm not. I mean, maybe on the Friday morning Pitt we'll talk about, what kind of outcomes you should hope for if you're a Pitt fan. Most of them boil down to Virginia and Miami losing. That's pretty much the most important thing for any, if you're a Pitt fan, if you're looking at other results this weekend, you want Virginia and Miami to lose as often as possible because that gives you a chance to move up to the top. But for the most part, I'm not going to spend too much time worrying about the three-way tiebreakers for the ACC tournament number one seed because, to be honest, there's too much of a chance of just weird stuff happening in the conference over this next week and a half or so, as evidenced by Boston College leading Virginia by 12 pretty far into the second half here. So we'll keep an eye on that, kind of keep it updated just to see what rolls out of this game. I'm not gonna do play-by-play, but I mean, obviously you can see me glancing off to the side. That's what I'm looking at there. Just kind of keeping an eye on the Virginia-Boston College game because, as we talked about last week, it's sort of the fun of Pitt being in this position here for the first time in a long time where we have to kind of care about other games and we have to kind of scoreboard watch a little bit and see what else is going on in the ACC and see what else is going on in college basketball because these things are relevant. People are watching, hey, which teams on the bubble lost this week? Which teams that are ranked lost this week? How do other outcomes affect Pitt's fate? And the most direct and sort of specific impact is going to come from these other games in the ACC, particularly games that involve Virginia and Miami. Clemson to a certain extent, although Clemson is behind Pitt and seems to be reeling. Although, as we're talking about games tonight, Clemson is pouring it on against Syracuse at home. I don't know if the Orange were looking ahead to the game at Pitt, but yeah, that's 8.8 minutes to go, and Clemson's up like 23 points in the second half, 75-52. They might score 100 in that game. And to be quite honest, I mean, I don't know if I expect Pitt to score 100 on Syracuse, but I think Pitt should be able to take advantage of the matchup with Syracuse. And, we could talk about that later on this show as well. But I think Pitt should be able to win that regular season home finale on Saturday against the Orange. Because I think that's a good matchup for Pitt, and they should be able to. I think they have the right personnel to take advantage of it. But a lot to talk about as far as that game goes. A lot to talk about as far as the two Pitt games that have happened since our last live show. The Virginia Tech game on the road, the Georgia Tech game last night at the Peterson Event Center. One loss, of course, at Virginia Tech, and then a win last night against Georgia Tech. And It ended up being an 8-point win, 76-68. And I think for a lot of Pitt fans who watched the game and followed it closely, it felt worse than an 8-point win. And I understand that. I mean, Georgia Tech was leading, by 4 with 12 minutes to go. The Yellow Jackets, they were down 1 at halftime, right? Pitt had a 1-point lead at halftime. Georgia Tech was able to turn that into a lead about 8 minutes into the second half. And it felt like, I wouldn't say Georgia Tech was in control, but Pitt seemed to be on its heels a little bit. Pitt seemed to be maybe panicking, maybe pushing a little bit, maybe pressing. And I don't mean the full court press that they did intentionally, but maybe panicking a little bit and losing some focus. Excuse me. I know you don't say excuse me when you sneeze, but I can't hear anybody say God bless you, so I'm going to have to take care of that myself. They seem to be losing focus a little bit and panicking. And the breakdowns were happening on defense, and that was troubling. It was concerning to see Pitt's defense last night against Georgia Tech, particularly after how they played against Virginia Tech, where the defense was the biggest culprit behind the loss. We're now down to 4.5 minutes to play, and Boston College is still up 12, so feel pretty good about the Eagles' chances here. We'll see if Virginia can manufacture a comeback, but I think they're going to suffer a loss here, which is huge for Pitt, of course. Georgia Tech seemed to have the momentum in its favor. Georgia Tech seemed to be, if not in control of the game, certainly controlling the momentum and sort of dictating to Pitt on what they wanted to do, really at both ends of the court. But credit to Pitt for fighting through it and battling and ending up with an 8-point win that might have felt like something less if you were at the game or you're watching it on TV, simply because of the way the game went over the course of the 40 minutes. But ultimately it goes as an 8-point win. And, this time of year, I think you get into February, Jeff Capel keeps saying it, his players keep saying it about how much of a grind it is. I think that when you're in this part of the season, I think it's tough. And you take any win you can get, any way you can get it. I don't think Virginia was fretting about their wins over Louisville and Notre Dame. I think they felt like they were happy to get out of it with a victory. Once you get to the postseason, once you get to the conference tournament and the NCAA tournament, I think that you get a little more pep in your step. It's something new. It's something different. You're in a different kind of environment. You're excited about it. But right now, even though there's a lot to play for and there's a lot at stake and there's a lot riding on these individual games, it's tough. It's tough. You've played almost 30 games so far. You are well into the season, and it's sort of, even though the end of the season is coming up, it can feel, I think, a little bit like there's no end in sight. I mean, Pitt only has one regular season home game left, but then they have 2 more times that they have to go on the road before they finally get to go to Greensboro, settle into one place for a while, play a bunch of games in a row, and really get that postseason energy and that postseason spark. And so they're trying to hold on however they can through this grind and win games by any means necessary, which is what they did last night against Georgia Tech. And so we could sit here and haggle over the details of that game, and we'll talk about the details of that game and what stood out. Like, there are relevant points to consider, but we can go back and forth about the game and this or that. But what it really comes down to is the team found a way to win. And not just a way to win, but they won their 20th game of the season. And talked a lot about this on the Morning Pit this morning. Kind of our post-game review and post-game breakdown. And covered a lot of ground talking about that Georgia Tech game, but spent quite a bit of time at the beginning of the show just talking about 20 wins, because I think that's a huge, huge accomplishment for this team and this program and this season. Nobody among us picked this team to win 20 games at the beginning of the year. I don't think even the most optimistic Pitt fans said this is an NCAA tournament team that's going to win 20 plus games. I don't, and there's no, I don't think anyone has to feel shame about not picking them to win 20 games. There was nothing to base that on. You had John Hughley coming back, you had Jamarius Burton coming back, you had Nike Sabandi, and then guys like Nate Santos and Will Jeffers if he was healthy. And then you were going to rely on all these transfers. You have no idea how the transfers are going to fit in. You have no idea how the transfers are going to mesh. You don't know how they're going to play with each other. You don't know how they're going to play with the returning guys. You don't know if they're capable of playing at this level. One guy's a transfer from Colgate. One guy's a guy who hasn't played basketball in 2 years. One guy's a guy who couldn't crack the starting lineup at Marquette. And you're going to rely on these guys, plus a junior college center who was kind of sort of nudged out of another power conference's recruiting class. You don't know what you're going to get out of that group. You don't know what to expect and what you can really hope to get. Excuse me. And so I'm not faulting anyone for not picking this team to win 20 games. I didn't pick them to win 20 games. I probably picked them to win 15 or 16, maybe 17 on the high end. I often say, point out that our staff, our Panther-Lair.com basketball writing staff, myself, Jim Hammett, Steve Gertz, Matt Steinbrink, and Houston Wilson, we all made our preseason predictions. Houston had him the highest. He had him winning 18 games, and nobody had him more than that, And so nobody was calling this a 20-win team. And so to get to 20 wins, more than 19, more than 21, 20 wins is such a benchmark in college basketball that I really think resonates. I really think it's important to reach that number. And it's always sort of stood out as a year or a number that, if you can get to 20 wins, you had a good season. You know what I mean? If you can get to 20 wins, you had some success, you accomplished something, and you had a good year. And Pitt hasn't done it in 7 years. Pitt hasn't had 20-plus wins in 7 seasons. It's been the 2015-16 season was the last time Pitt had 20-plus wins. And so to break a 7-year streak of not getting to 20 wins, I think is huge. And Jeff Capel said it wasn't, he wasn't focused on it. Nellie Cummings said that he wasn't focused on it, and I understand why. And I guess that's fair. I guess those guys shouldn't be focused on it, or at least not talking about it publicly. But we can focus on it, and we will focus on it. We have focused on it, and I think Pitt fans have largely celebrated it, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. But here's a chance to break another streak. You know what I mean? Where they went 7 years without winning 20 games. 7 years without, a winning record or avoid, 7 years of losing records in ACC play. 7 years of not having a winning record overall. And they broke those streaks this season already. And that next one to break, I guess you could start talking about ACC tournament seeding and maybe wins in the ACC tournament. But the next big one is getting into the NCAA tournament. And that's what's out there for this team. And that's the path that they're on. I don't know if they're guaranteed in yet or guaranteed out or how many they have to win to lock themselves in or whatever. I know they're not guaranteed out right now. I don't even think they're on the bubble. They could play themselves onto the bubble if they lose to Syracuse or Notre Dame or whoever. But I think, they put themselves in pretty strong position to make it. If they just keep taking care of business, which they largely have this season. Boston College now up 12 with less than 2.5 minutes to play. Virginia's going down. Certainly looks to be the case. So Pitt's got Syracuse on Saturday. Panthers beat the Orange at the Dome earlier this year. I would expect them to do the same thing at the Peterson Events Center. I think this Pitt team is built well to beat Syracuse. I think they're built well to attack that 2-3 zone with the outside shooting and the number of guys who can make those mid-range jumpers. Jamarius Burton loves the mid-range jumper. Nellie Cummings can make a mid-range jumper. Nike Sabandi's not terrible at the mid-range jumper. And quite frankly, you could even get something out of like Jorge Diaz-Graham or Guillermo Diaz-Graham at the free throw line. Putting them there, tossing the ball inside to them and have them turn around and shoot. They're not as good at those mid-range shots as Burton is, but they're good enough to be a threat, and I think they're good enough to knock a few down and force Syracuse to have to account for them. And the more you force Syracuse in that zone to account for guys in the interior, the more shots you're going to have outside, the more opportunities you're going to have to work the ball in. And so you're really, I just think this is such a good personnel grouping to attack the zone because of what they do and what they're able to do and what they do well. That I think this should be. I would expect this to be a game that Pitt wins even more comfortably than they did against Georgia Tech. That ended up being an 8-point win. I would expect them to win by more than that. Pitt and Syracuse is always a big game and a rivalry game, and there's always a lot of intensity in it. But I think Pitt should be able to take care of business here in the home finale and give a sold-out crowd a really good show, and I think the fans will show their appreciation in kind. I think, obviously the biggest thing to work on right now is the defense. Defense was an issue in this, really the last two games, the game at Virginia Tech and the game against Georgia Tech, 1 loss, 1 win. I think they've allowed opponents to shoot better than 47% in 5 out of the last 9 games. That's a recipe for disaster. They're 4-1 in those games, Virginia Tech being the only loss. But they've got to get better on defense, and whether that's practice, whether it's scheme and adjustments and coaching, whether it's just players committing to it more, maybe it's just part of the grind. That they're losing some of that focus. They need to get a little bit more pep back in their step, so to speak. And I think it's probably a combination of those things. But they're going to have to defend better than they have lately. I think they've been a pretty solid defensive team. I agree with Jeff Capel when he says that. But they've got to be better than they have. It's now a 14-point game with 40 seconds left to play. Boston College is going to beat Virginia here. The Eagles knocking out the Cavs. Virginia is not fouling. And that's a huge loss for Virginia and a huge game for Pitt. Panthers now, let's check the ACC standings, what this is going to be with Virginia going down against Boston College. Of course, my computer wants to be nice and slow about loading the ACC standings here. There it is. So Virginia is going to drop to 13-4. Same record as Pitt at 13-4. Virginia will probably stay ahead of Pitt on the standings that you look at on the website, on the ACC website, just because they have a better overall record than Pitt. But ultimately, Pitt and Virginia will be tied in the standings, and Pitt, of course, would have the tiebreaker for the ACC tournament seeding. And Miami would move up into the spot for number 1 as of tonight. At the end of tonight, Saturday is going to bring a whole new series of challenges and games that we'll all be keeping an eye on. But you're going to wake up Thursday morning, and Miami's going to be at the top of the ACC with Virginia and Pitt right behind them, and sort of further closing in on, securing the double bye. Clemson now has 5 losses. NC State and Duke have 6. Pitt, Virginia, Miami, all with 4. It's still bunched up there. Nobody's locked in a double bye yet, but you're getting closer. And another win, potentially could put Pitt. Another win guarantees Pitt doesn't finish worse than 5th, lower than the 5 seed. If I'm reading this right, if I'm thinking about it right, if Pitt wins against Syracuse on Saturday, they'll have no worse than 6 losses. NC State already has 6 losses. Pitt has the head-to-head tiebreaker. So if Pitt beats Syracuse, I'm just sort of doing this off the top of my head as we sit here. If Pitt beats Syracuse on Saturday, they'll have no worse than the 5 seed in the ACC tournament. And obviously one more win would guarantee a double bye spot. So that's pretty good. That's a pretty good carrot to dangle out there when we talk about things for Pitt to achieve. Getting a top 4 seed and a double bye in the ACC tournament, that's a pretty good one to have, and it's on the line. A top 5 seed is on the line on Saturday, and if they win that, a top 4 seed will be on the line next Wednesday when they go to Notre Dame. We'll do a post-game show after that one. By the way, our live show on next Wednesday night will be after the Notre Dame game. We'll just do a post-game show. That's always fun to do. Let's get into the comments and questions. Want to, you know what? Let me see here. bring up our comments and questions. If you want to join the show, if you want to have a comment on the show, something to say, your comments on Pitt basketball or football or recruiting, questions about Pitt football or basketball or recruiting, you can post it in that chat screen. It's right over there on the right-hand side. And, of course, if you want to make sure your comment gets read or your question gets answered, you can be a super chatter. Kick a couple bucks to the podcast, and we will make sure we get to your comment or your question. Of course, as always, our friend Chris Gates from Chris Gates Fitness. This Wednesday live show is sponsored by Chris Gates Fitness. Chris is an online fitness coach from Pittsburgh, and he works with people all over the world to create customized fitness and nutrition programs that work. He's also a huge Pitt fan, and he loves supporting the Wednesday live show every week. Now, once you're done listening to the Panther-Lair Show, go check out Chris's YouTube channel, Chris Gates. He uploads full podcast episodes once a week, along with quick tips every single day to help you manage your diet and your workout routine. You go to youtube.com/Chris Gates Fitness. Chris, C-H-R-I-S, Gates, G-A-T-E-S, Fitness. And then his website, chrisgatesfitness.com. So, yeah, finish watching this video or listening to the Panther-Lair podcast, and then go over to youtube.com/Chris Gates Fitness. You got to check him out. Chris is a huge Pitt fan, and he can really help you with some of your goals, your fitness, your health, and lifestyle and nutrition goals. So go check him out, chrisgatesfitness.com, youtube.com/Chris Gates Fitness. And thanks to Chris for supporting the podcast. All right. Super Chatter. Michael B. starts us off, says, "Hi, Chris. Couple questions. Do you think Pitt has a really good chance to land either of those 5-star recruits that were at the game last night? Also, should Jamarius Burton sit out a game or two to rest his knee for the postseason?" So Burton is an interesting question. We'll get to the recruiting thing in a second. Burton's an interesting question. I've sort of felt like Burton is not, he's not playing as well as he has. I'm trying to find the right way to put this, because I actually have been debating this about what I think about Jamarius Burton and his play of late. So here's the stats, and I calculated this for tomorrow's morning Pitt, so I'm going to talk about it there too. But in the last 8 games, so since Pitt lost to Florida State, Jamarius Burton is averaging 13.5 points per game, 4.9 rebounds, and 4 assists. So basically, call it 13 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists per game. He's shooting 40% from the floor, and 45% inside the three-point line. And he's playing 33 minutes per game. And so I look at those stats and I say, boy, over the last 8 games, Jamarius Burton's been pretty good. 13, 5, and 4? Yeah, I mean, that's a great stat line. That's better than Nelly Cummings. Nelly Cummings, who I think has played really well, particularly in the last few games, it doesn't have that stat line over the last 8. So Jamarius Burton is playing well, but I think what's happening with Jamarius Burton, or at least why I'm coming away with the impression that maybe he has hit a wall a little bit or slowed down, is that, particularly in these last 2 games, the Virginia Tech game and the Georgia Tech game, there were moments in the second half where earlier this season, Jamarius Burton would have taken over the game. You know what I mean? Just taken over the game. And he did it multiple times in January and even early February. So we're not just talking about games in December. We're talking about games in the last month and a half, where he would take over a game. And then there were points in the Virginia Tech game on Saturday, and there were points last night where it was time for that to happen. But it didn't happen for whatever reason. Sometimes he passed up a shot. Sometimes he took a shot. And he made some big plays last night. There's no question about it. Jamarius Burton made some big plays for Pitt in the second half to help beat Georgia Tech. But he did not take over the game the way we've seen him do a bunch of times this season. And we've seen him take over games a lot. And he didn't do it last night. And he didn't do it against Virginia Tech. We've come to expect certain things out of Jamarius Burton. And for whatever reason, they don't seem to be happening. Even though the production is still kind of holding up, it doesn't seem to be, those clutch plays, those big time moments where Burton really comes through. And so I think that's been affecting my perception of how Burton has played. I think if he was slowing down, if his legs were getting tired, if his knee needed rest, I think Jeff Capel would do it. I think Jeff Capel realizes that they need Jamarius Burton. Yeah, they needed him for last night. They needed him on Saturday. They're going to need him this Saturday. They're going to need him next Wednesday. They're going to need him the following Saturday. And then they're going to need him the following week, even more than any of those previous games. And so they need to cut down on his minutes. I know they had a good lineup out there that they liked, using Burton and Cummings and Sabandi and Hinson and Federico. But I think, Capel can see the long game as well. And I think there's some interesting questions to be asked about legs and preserving legs and, helping these guys kind of stay healthy and fresh for the remainder of the season and into the postseason. But I think if Burton was really showing signs of fatigue, I think Capel would adjust. I think he would give him rest, the rest that he needs. And that didn't happen. You know what I mean? He didn't really... are we buffering here? Is there a problem? I apologize if we're... it looks on YouTube like we're having a buffering issue, but everything's working fine on my end. I'm not sure what the problem is here. I seem to be sending a good signal, but I apologize if you're getting apologize if you're getting a buffering issue. But either way, as we talk about Burton, he did have a knee issue earlier this season. He sat out 2 games, I think, just resting the knee where he had some inflammation. I wondered after he sat out the second game if that was going to be something that would come up multiple times this year. It hasn't cost him another game, but maybe it's caused some other, maybe it's slowed him down a little bit. And if that's the case, then he needs to rest. You need to play the long game. You need to give him time to get that as healthy as possible. When in the past, these other 2 times when he had to sit because of it, he did come back strong. And so, if that's what you need to do, then do it, because you need to be able to have him for the next 10 games, not just the next 3, or not just last night's game. So, we'll see how Burton develops and progresses. We'll see how his playing time progresses. I mean, I think if you can get strong performances out of Greg Elliott and Nike Sabandi, you can put those 2 guys on the court together. Nelly Cummings has been playing really well. You should be able to not rest him against Syracuse, but you should be able to get away with maybe not necessarily playing him 33 minutes. And they actually cut it down. I mean, he averaged 33 minutes over the last 8 games. But last night he played 28. So even cutting that down to 28 or 26 might be ideal. And if you're in a position where you can, dropping that even down to 25 or less, might be good, just to make sure he's as healthy as possible heading into the crucial stretch, which is ultimately the postseason. As for recruiting, you asked about the 2 5-stars who were at the game last night. Alar Malouk and Malik Thomas. I mean, they're 2 local guys that have been in a bunch of games. They've seen Pitt, play a ton in person. They've been in a bunch of games this season. I mean, it seems like they've got a good chance. But those guys are young. They're what, class of 2025, I think it is. So you're still a few years away from finding out. And Pitt's going to need to replicate this success and keep having success like this in order to increase their chances. But those guys have been in a bunch of games this season. I've lost count of how many times those Thomas and Malouk have been there. So we'll see what happens. But they're definitely guys to keep an eye on, because they've certainly got interest in Pitt. It seems pretty clear. Had another super chatter. RJ Seaman 38 is a super chatter, but I don't know what your comment is. Says, if Pitt wins the ACC and the ACC title, what seed would they get? I have no idea. I have no idea what seed they would end up with if they win the ACC regular season championship and the ACC tournament. I mean, you would think they would have to win the next 3, right? So that would put them at 23 wins, and then they would have to win 3 in Greensboro. So they'd be a 26-win team, major conference champion, major conference tournament champion. They jump to the 4 seed, 3 seed. I don't think they're going to, I don't think they can jump high enough to be a 2 seed, but my completely uninformed, less than expert opinion is, probably somewhere, 4 or 3 seed, I would guess, but they would have to, they would have to rattle off 6 wins in a row, which would ultimately be a 7-game winning streak, including yesterday, in order to pull that off. And they haven't had a 7-game winning streak yet. They had 6. They haven't had 7. Can't rule it out. It just seems unlikely. Josh Newark says, I don't recall seeing Nate Santos play at Virginia Tech with the team looking a bit fatigued right now, and with 500 fouls on Saturday, I found that surprising. Santos played 23 seconds at Virginia Tech, did not record a statistic at all. He didn't have a shot, didn't have a rebound, didn't have a turnover, didn't have anything. Nate Santos, 23 seconds at Virginia Tech. He played 8.5 minutes against Boston College, a minute 21 at Florida State. He played 18 minutes in the win over Louisville at the Peterson Events Center when they got the bench guys in a lot. He played 16 minutes in the other game at Louisville. Those are pretty much his 2 high water marks. Other than the West Virginia game, he played 29 minutes. But in ACC play, he's only hit double digits in minutes. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And 2 of them were Louisville games. And the other 2 were the Clemson game and the first Georgia Tech game. He's just, I think as long as Blake Hinson is healthy and not in foul trouble, Nate Santos isn't going to play a whole lot. Maybe if they go with a smaller lineup, if they have foul trouble for Federico and Guillermo Diaz-Graham, maybe they'll go with Santos and Hinson on the court together. But as long as Hinson is available to be out there, and he played 38.5 minutes last night, and Santos played the other minute 40 at that position. That's what it's going to look like. If Hinson is healthy and not in foul trouble, he's playing all the time. And he should. He's the wild card for this team. I've gone over that about 1,000,000 times. I don't think I need to do it again, but he's the guy who makes I don't think I need to repeat again how I think Blake Hinson is the X factor, but he is. Let's see. Josh Newark says, my concern with the team is the lack of defensive intensity. That sequence with Nelly having a horrible turnover and then not getting back on defense was troubling. Injury issue, fatigue, just bad effort. That play, I think Nelly Cummings thought he threw it out of bounds. I think he didn't think that Georgia Tech was able to keep the ball in bounds and bring it up. So he was caught off guard, and I'm not excusing it. You need to pay closer attention. You need to be on top of things and be focused. But I think he was caught off guard, and I think the rest of the team was caught off guard. I'm just going to chalk that up to the grind, the grind of playing in February. And at some point, you are going to have to turn it back up. At some point, you are going to have to flip that switch back on. And I don't think it's as easy as just saying, we got to flip the switch. I think usually you're more likely to get what you need in that regard from some kind of external change, like going to Greensboro and playing in a postseason tournament. And that's the opportunity that they're going to have 2 weeks from now. But in the meantime, they got to find a way to focus and beat Syracuse and beat Notre Dame and see what happens when they go to Miami. They have to find a way to refocus on those games, and they have to find a way to fight through the grind and the fatigue and the tired and the banged up and all the different things that sort of plague a team when they get to February. They have to find a way to fight through those things and survive these next 3 games, this next week and a half, before they'll get an extra little sort of kick in the pants, an extra little bit of life that I think will come from being in that tournament setting. You get a little extra electricity. Our 4th grade boys basketball team started their tournament play tonight, and they all had a little extra pep in their step. You know what I mean? When they got out there, I think all day they were excited. And I think by the time they got to the game, they were real pumped up and ready to go, ready to get after it. And I think when you're a college basketball team, you get to the postseason tournament, you're playing in a different venue. It's not another team's venue. It's not your venue. It's a neutral court. It's a different place. You know what I mean? I don't know. I think he can give you that extra little lift to pull you out of those February doldrums and really kind of get you pumped up. But they need to manufacture some of that on their own internally in these next 3 games so they can, finish as strong as possible. Dan Davis says, so I hope you guys can still see me. My thing, listen, put a message in the chat if you can still see us. I'm getting a weird message from YouTube. So put a message in the chat to let me know if you're still seeing this video and if it's still working and everything's still kind of humming along as it should. You guys said you had no issue earlier when you were buffering. Something's just weird with YouTube's playback. All right, Josh Newark says you're all good. All right, thanks, guys. I appreciate it because YouTube is not YouTube is showing me something weird here, but the chats are still coming in, so I appreciate it. Let's see. Dan Davis says Pitt with tired legs. Give him a day off or do what Capel said to work them harder in practice. Well, so they played yesterday. They were off today, and then they got back to practice. They'll get back to practice tomorrow. We're actually set to talk to Jeff Capel tomorrow to have sort of a regularly scheduled media availability with him. We'll ask him about practice and kind of what approach he took. This is where coaches have to really kind of feel their team. You know what I mean? They have to get a sense of how their team is feeling. They have to know their guys and know what their guys need and know what buttons to push. They have to know how hard to push them to get the work done that they need to get done while also not pushing them too far that you end up burning them out before Saturday's game. And I think, we look at this and we say these are all guys in their their early 20s, you know what I mean? Prime of their life, peak of their athletic ability and all this stuff, peak conditioning, but they played almost 30 games. Counting the exhibitions, they have played 30 games. And when you get to that point, you're going to be banged up. You're going to be slow. You're going to be a little bit tired. It's sort of natural. And they have to find a way to, the coach's job is to find a way to get them through, get them through these situations. And so we'll see what Capel decides to do with them. But, this is where he has to, this is where he's going to make his living, is by knowing how to coach this team, not just in the games, but through these days in between the games. Michael B says 20 wins is definitely a huge accomplishment, especially after a 1-3 start where, let's be honest, they looked like crap. Yeah, they did. I mean, they were terrible. They were really bad against West Virginia. They were really bad against Michigan, and then they just straight up blew it against VCU. And I had the same thoughts that all of you did. I'm sure if we went back and looked at the Morning Pitt episodes from those weeks and the live shows and things like that, we would talk about how, boy, Pitt looks really bad. This is going to be a long season, and it's going to be really rough. They're facing some adversity, but they're not dealing with it very well. Well, they've dealt with it pretty well. 19-5 since then? 24 games, I think, of evidence that they're pretty good. It came together for this team as much as it's come together for any Pitt team in recent history, at least that I can remember, in recent memory, I should say. It has come together for them. And guys have gelled. They work well together, and they're the right personalities. I mean, Jeff Capel put together a really ideal roster this year. Roster construction was as good a job as Capel has done since he got to Pitt. There's always going to be that lingering conversation that we'll have, certainly in the offseason, and every now and then it comes up about whether he can do it again next year. Maybe he won't have to do quite the roster rebuilding and roster construction when he's bringing in 3 freshmen like he's bringing in. But he's going to have to, he's still going to have to fill out this roster with transfers, which means finding the right transfers the way he did this year and finding those guys who can really mesh with the team and create good chemistry in the locker room. It finally got through this year. It finally happened this year. The message finally got through. Now he's got to do it again. But we'll talk about that a lot in the offseason for sure. Anthony Tennyson says, sorry, Chris, after I saw them play in the exhibition, I I guess he's saying he predicted 20 wins and at least 20 wins, and they would make it into the NCAA tournament. Hey, Tony, if you saw that coming, if you predicted it, more props to you. Exhibition games are a hard thing to base it on. Even the Tennessee Martin game, which was a lot of fun, and it looked like they were having a lot of fun out there. It was tough to say, oh, they're going to be really good now. You know what I mean? Just particularly when you followed up that Tennessee Martin game with the West Virginia game and the Michigan game and the VCU game, like we talked about. It was particularly a tough sell to talk about this team having any kind of success this season. But if you looked at the exhibition games and you came away convinced, then kudos to you, man. You had more foresight than the rest of us. Let's see. Wolf HD says, football question. Who are some of the high-tier 2024 recruits that have a decent chance to come to Pitt? I know Quentin Martin is the crown jewel, but who else? Well, that's $1 million question, Wolf HD. That's $1 million question. I mean, Martin is the big-time guy locally. Anthony Specca locally is the number one. Specca is already committed to Penn State. Martin seems like a long shot. They've got a couple of 4-star commitments right now in Day Farmer and Jasir Whittington. They've got a couple of medium 3-star recruits in Ty Uas and Jules Goff. Beyond that, what I could say is this: rather than like rattle off names now, because it can be tough to sort of predict sitting here. But coming up in the next 2 months, I think we're going to get a real idea of who those legitimate targets are, because we're going to be coming up to spring camp. And spring camp will start on the 14th, run through the spring game on the 15th, I think it is, of April. And you're going to see recruits visit during that stretch. And that's going to tell you a lot about who they're really on and who's really interested in them. And I think those spring visits are going to set the table for the official visits in June, where then you're going to really start landing those commitments. And so it's sort of step by step. They had a handful of guys who were here for some junior days in January. We talked about a lot of those guys and talked to a lot of those guys. Now we'll see who comes back in March and April for spring camp visits, and then who shows up in June for official visits. And so you go from one where the junior days I've identified sort of a big group of kids, and then the spring camp visits will identify a big group of kids, and then the June official visits will identify a big group of kids. And as you filter from one to the next, you get a real sense of who's out there and who's on the board and who's seriously considering Pitt. And so that'll be something that evolves over the course of this spring, and we'll certainly have a lot of coverage of it on Panther-Lair.com. Let's see. Josh Newark says, higher likelihood Saturday. The Zoo tossing Monopoly money at Jim Boeheim, or Jim Boeheim getting caught picking his nose on camera? Probably the Monopoly money thing. Josh also says, Pitt needs 2 wins to secure the double bye. Duke could take us over if we don't win 2 more. That's right. Yeah, the magic number for the double bye, assuming Duke didn't lose a game or doesn't lose a game, was always 3, with Georgia Tech being the first one of those 3. Beyond that, let me bring up this schedule here. If Duke does lose a game, so I'm looking at this weekend. Today's the 22nd. So on Saturday, Duke hosts Virginia Tech, Miami hosts Florida State, and Virginia goes to North Carolina. If Duke were to lose to Virginia Tech, that would drop the number. That would be Duke's 7th loss. So Pitt would, if they would beat Syracuse, they could not finish with more than 6 losses, and then they would, if Duke loses on Saturday, and we'll talk about this probably on the Morning Pitt on Friday, we'll talk about the games you need to keep an eye on. If Duke loses on Saturday and Pitt wins on Saturday, Pitt will have clinched a double bye. Period. Point blank. Simple as that. If they win on Saturday, like I said earlier, if Pitt wins on Saturday, they clinch a top 5 seed. You need a little bit of help to clinch the top 4 seed. If that doesn't happen, if Pitt and Duke both win, then Pitt could clinch it with a win at Notre Dame on Wednesday night. Clinch a top 4 seed, a double bye spot, which I think is the next thing you're sort of working for. Michael B says Pitt controls its destiny now. They win out, they win the ACC. Yeah. Well, so you always have that thing. I mean, if Pitt wins out, they will, excuse me, they will get the number 1 seed. But remember, the ACC doesn't use tiebreakers in naming the conference champion. If Pitt and Virginia both win out, and they're both 16-4, they would be co-champions. Pitt would have the number 1 seed in the ACC tournament, but they would share the regular season title between them, Pitt and Virginia, if both teams win out. So Pitt controls its own destiny for the number 1 seed in the conference tourney. They do not control their own destiny for the regular season championship. They need help from Virginia to lose in order for that to happen. Will Z says, thank you very much, Boston College. Yeah, Boston College did the deed tonight, knocking off Syracuse by 15, 63-48. Meanwhile, Clemson beat Syracuse, or Boston College knocked off Virginia by 15, 63-48. Clemson beat Syracuse pretty handily by 18, 91-73. So that was a ugly one for the Orange as they get set to come into Pitt next week, or on Saturday, excuse me. Scrolling down. RJC Man 38 says the Twins are too weak. Not sure you can give them a lot of minutes. I mean, they have to play. I think Guillermo Diaz-Graham in particular has to play. You know, Federico played almost 34 minutes last night. Yeah, I don't think you're going to get 34 minutes out of him every game. You know, the last 8 games, those stats since the loss to Florida State, he's averaged about 28.5 minutes per game. And that's actually what he's averaged over the last 18 games since he moved into the starting lineup full time. He's averaged about 28.5 minutes per game. That's probably the range you want him in. But in order to keep him at 30 minutes or under, Guillermo Diaz-Graham is going to have to play. And no, it's not great. They're not strong. Federico's not strong either. He's probably a little stronger than Guillermo, but not too much. But they're getting better. I think the Diaz-Graham twins are both getting better. I think Guillermo's getting better at banging inside. I think Federico's getting better at banging inside. And I think what has impressed me the most, particularly about the twins, and Federico shows this as well, but he's a little bit older and I think a little bit stronger than Guillermo. But what has impressed me the most about Guillermo Diaz-Graham is no matter how many times he gets banged around, and guys just sort of toss him aside and he gets knocked to the ground and all these things, he just does not back down. I mean, he's aggressive. He's fearless. He's not intimidated. He doesn't play like he's intimidated. He puts his nose in all the time and usually he gets busted, but he does not back down. I appreciate that about Guillermo. I think Jorge is the same way. Federico plays that way as well. These guys are in mismatches most of the time just based on strength. They're bigger than most guys that they face. They have more reach, bigger wingspan. They have more length. They're taller. I mean, all those things. But they're not big or they're not strong. Not like the guys they're playing against. And so they're in a mismatch most games. But they're not afraid of it. And like I give them a lot of credit for that. And it's resulted in them getting, like I say, knocked around a lot. We have a photo, or USA Today Sports took a photo from the Virginia Tech game. I think it's Guillermo is trying to go up with the ball, trying to go up for a shot, and his elbow, there's just blood running down his elbow. And that just seems about right for him. I'm surprised he doesn't have more bloody noses with as much as he gets knocked around. But he just, every time he goes down, he gets back up. Like I say, I mean, Guillermo, Jorge, they Chumbawamba the crap out of this thing, man. And credit to them for doing it. Big time. Let's see here. Scrolling through here. A lot of comments. When I thought I was having some technical, and I'm still having some technical issues. YouTube is all messed up tonight. So a lot of people were saying that everything's fine. So I appreciate the help here. A. Sabo says this season has been a blast to watch. Some sort of postseason run would be a delicious cherry on top of this surprise Sunday. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do. In the postseason, ACC tournament and NCAA tournament. I mean, I think they've shown that they can play with anybody. Maybe the second half of Duke was the only time they were really outclassed by an opponent. I would take them. I would like their chances in a rematch with Virginia Tech. I would like their chances in a rematch with Clemson. Anybody in the ACC, I don't think there's anyone you're really afraid of. This game against Miami in the regular season finale is going to be tough because Miami's good. But Pitt has shown that they can play with Miami. They can beat Miami. They've got the tools. They've got the weapons. I think they've got the personnel. They're not without their weaknesses, but I think their strengths are strong enough, and they understand their strengths, and they know how to play to their strengths, and they're willing to get the ball to their teammates to capitalize on their strengths and mismatches and matchup advantages that they might come across. There's a really good makeup to this team, personnel-wise, chemistry-wise, all those things. There's a really good makeup that I think, and it's the kind of makeup that I think if you get hot, you can go on a run. When you have these kinds of shooters, when you have Blake Hinson, when you have Greg Elliott, when you have Nelly Cummings, when you have Nike Sabandi coming off the bench, you're always going to have a chance. I think to battle back into games if you fall behind, and you're going to have a chance against just about any opponent that you face. And then you have a guy like Jamarius Burton, who up until the last couple of games has been really good at taking over games. You have a guy like Federico, who, since he moved into the starting lineup over the last 18 games, he's been a regular starter. He's averaging 8 points and 7 rebounds and 2 blocks per game. He's shooting 63% 62.4% from the floor. He's even shooting 74% from the free throw line. He went 8 of 8 in that game last night. He's committing like 3 fouls per game on average since he moved into the starting lineup. So you've got a lot of good pieces, like the kind of pieces that like make you think, you know what, if they're on, if they're defending well, and if the shots are falling, they've got the talent and the roster to go on a bit of a run here. And it could be pretty fun to watch this team play in the ACC tournament in Greensboro in 2 weeks. And then again, once we get into March, I think this team has a chance to make a little noise, and I think it could be fun to watch. Let's see. Josh Newark says, does Heather Lyke extend Jeff Capel at the end of the season for an additional decade? I am only partially joking. No, I don't think there's any extension coming at the end of the decade. Capel's under contract for this season, 22-23, and then 23-24, 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27. He's got 4 more years left on his contract. There's no reason really to extend a guy with 4 years left on his contract after the current season. There's just not. I don't know what you really gain by doing that. He kind of got like built-in extensions already, where he didn't sign his contract for a year, and then he got an extension, just sort of an auto year added, or an extra year sort of auto added as a result of the NCAA infractions and probation that happened before his watch. And so he's already up to 4 more years here beyond this season on his current deal. I don't think you need to do it right now. And that's not to say he doesn't deserve some praise for the job that he's done. I'm sure he's got bonuses written in for the accomplishments they've already achieved this season, winning record overall, winning record in the ACC, 20 wins total, making the NCAA tournament, all those kinds of things. And I think he's probably got more bonuses that he can achieve, I would guess, over the next month. So I think you can give him those things. That can be the reward for a job well done, but I don't think there needs to be a contract extension anytime soon. If he had 2 years left on the deal after this, then yeah, maybe you do it with recruiting in mind, But right now, when you've got 4 more years on paper signed, I don't think you really need, it's not holding you back in recruiting. You've got long-term, you've got stability and longevity kind of built in already. So I don't know if there's a contract extension that's necessary there. Michael B says, Chris, it seems the other players now are looking to get Fetty the ball inside, all except Hinson. Yesterday he was driving and ignored Fetty wide open. Sorry, I got distracted by some of the other comments. I don't even know what some of these people were talking about. But as far as Federico goes, they come and go on when they try to get interior post touches. You know what I mean? Entry passes into the post. Sometimes I think they try it early in a game and then sort of go away from it. I think Federico still works best, number one, in transition. Number two, on pick and rolls. I don't think it works great in the half court offense. If he posts up, I don't think that's really his game. He's not strong enough to go back up with offensive rebounds. I don't think he gets a lot of baskets that way. I think he gets most of his baskets, and I think he's the best at transition and going on in pick and roll situations and kind of working like that. That's probably where he's going to continue to be a focus this season. I don't think they're going to run many plays to get the ball inside. Outside of a pick and roll, if they get the look that they want. I don't think they're going to have a lot of entry pass plays, just because he's not strong enough to be a reliable force inside. Tito Panther is a super chatter, and you've had so many posts, I don't even know which one you want me to address. Let's see. Maybe what poster on Panther-Lair would you love to punch in the face? I don't want to punch any posters in the face. I love all the posters on Panther-Lair.com. Everybody who posts on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com is my favorite. I have none that I love the most or hate the most. I love everyone equally on Panther-Lair.com, because the reality is, when it comes down to it, there is a community on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, and I think that's a big part of the appeal for a lot of the people who do subscribe, is that community on the message boards. It's the best online community of Pitt sports fans that I think you're going to find on the internet. And they're on the message boards all day, every day, discussing Pitt football, Pitt basketball, and Pitt recruiting. And so, when you're in a community like that, you're going to have disagreements. You're going to have good guys and bad guys. You're going to have, as I say, sort of agreements and disagreements and all those things. But when it comes down to it, it's still part of the community. And so we're all family there, even if we don't always all get along. But, the best part is, tonight we'll finish this up. I'll get ready, go to bed, check the board before I go to bed, get up in the morning, check the board, and there'll be all new posts, new things to read about, new things to talk about, new things to reply to, new conversations that are going on. It's a great setup and a great, like I say, online community of Pitt sports fans, football, basketball, and recruiting. They're talking about it all day, every day there at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. So make sure you go check it out. If you're a Pitt fan, it's the place you want to be on the internet. And then, of course, while you're here, make sure you like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Like button is down there. Subscribe button is down there. Click both of those things. Do me a solid on that one. We really appreciate it. I appreciate everybody who joined the chat tonight. It's always a lot of fun to have these conversations, talk about Pitt sports, for an hour or so on a Wednesday night. It's like a call-in show, except you just post your comments and I read them in your voice. We don't get to hear your voice directly, but we get to hear your comments and your questions. So I always say it's like a Pitt call-in show. I mean, I don't know. Are there any other hour-long Pitt call-in shows that you can find? Probably not. So that's what we serve that purpose right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. But remember, next Wednesday night, we will be live after the Pitt Notre Dame game. It's a 7 o'clock game, so we'll probably be live around 9, quarter after 9, somewhere around there. No later than 9:30, I would think. So right around now, actually, we'll be starting next Wednesday night. But it'll be post-game shows, so make sure you tune in for that. The penultimate game of the regular season will be going live after it to talk about the game. Thanks for tuning in tonight. We appreciate it. We got 2 more morning pits to bring you over for the rest of the week. We got one tomorrow and one Friday. And then Pitt Syracuse on Saturday, the home finale. I'm sure you'll be there enjoying the game. That should be a fun one. I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about in the aftermath of that game. But thanks for tuning in tonight. Thanks for watching the podcast whenever you checked it out later in the week or whenever it may be. We appreciate it. We appreciate everybody who's in the chat and all the super chatters and things like that. So thanks for joining us tonight. Hope you have a great rest of the night and great day tomorrow. And we'll talk to you on the morning pit right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.